I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Alyssa Ford Morel, who has been a close friend and colleague since we trained together as Master Gardeners in 2012. Alyssa has had an interest in gardening from a very young age and went on to work in the landscape department while in college. She was invited to become a leader at our Glen Carlin demonstration garden in 2013 while she was still a Master Gardener intern, and became a certified Master Naturalist and an ambassador for the Northern Virginia Bird Alliance shortly after that. In all of these roles, Alyssa has been making a difference in the lives of gardeners in our region and beyond through her articles in Plant This, Not That series, enhancements to our public garden, consultation visits to other home gardens, leading tours of her own garden, the creation of numerous short videos and in-person and virtual presentations. She educates the public on the critical importance of biodiversity in our environment, the reasons for removing invasive plants, and the special interrelationships between native plants and our wildlife. Julie is providing links to many of these resources in the chat so you can enjoy referring to them in the future. Today, Alyssa will be sharing her specific knowledge on native plants and their support for birds. With that, Alyssa, I'm pleased to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Elaine. I am so happy to be here. This is a talk that I really enjoy. It hits a sweet spot between my husband and I. He's a big birder. He's out birding right now. And I am a gardener, and this is where we intersect. Now, this presentation is based on a funny little conceit that I had. One of my favorite writers is Judith Martin, also known as Miss Manners. And I love the way that she can just say, yes, this is what you should do. And she kind of believes that you can rule the world by using good etiquette. And so I want to talk about what is good etiquette to welcome birds into your yard. And that includes both how you treat them and what you offer them to eat. So before we get too far going, let's go to what we're talking about today, just so that you're prepared. This presentation is divided into three parts. First, we're talking about 7 do's and don'ts to be an excellent bird host. Then we are going to present 7 great sustenance plants that will provide them with food. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with 7 keystone plants, which we'll explain what keystone plants are when we get there. So let's get going with our first topic, 7 do's and don'ts to be an excellent bird host. And I have tried to, so that I don't have to say every single one, I've tried to put the name of the bird and often the plants as you see them, so that I don't necessarily have to repeat that all the time. So what we want to do is start with the same thing that we generally start with anytime that we have a guest come to our home. We offer them a drink of something. Sometimes it's water for people, sometimes it's something else. But in the case with birds, we want it to be water. And water is super important to birds. It is their source of fluid. All birds need water real regularly for both drinking and bathing. You can see the little robin taking a bath. That's in my own home. There, it's right outside my front door in that little fountain. And since we started it back up in spring, have had so many wonderful birds both drinking and bathing in it. And they're so fun when you watch them taking a bath. We have that in the front yard, and in the backyard, we have a bird bath that simply attaches to our deck railing. But it is a little bit special because it actually plugs in and stays warm enough that ice does not form. And so water is available through winter. And you can see how popular that is in this center bottom picture, we've got a flicker taking a drink, and waiting for it is a mockingbird waiting its turn. Mind you, I want to say that there's been a sort of urban myth floating around that you shouldn't put out water in winter for birds, that if they bathe, when they fly away, their feathers will, the water will freeze on their feathers and weigh them down so that they can't fly. And that's a myth. Birds know how to bathe and get the water off. They're not going to do anything to endanger themselves. Birds need shallow water. A lot of people have bird baths out that are frankly too deep. The bird, if they hop in it, are going to have to swim, and that's not something they want. So if you have a deep bird bath, you might want to put a rock in there that they can stand on. Another thing to remember is that birds are used to finding their water at ground level in streams. They don't necessarily look for water high up. Now, of course, sometimes they'll use water that's high up, like this one on our deck. But I just want to say, if you have a choice, having the water closer to the ground is going to make them feel more comfortable. Bird baths do need to be kept clean and free of chemicals. In the summertime, cleaning every other day will also be great because it'll keep the mosquitoes away. People often ask me what they should clean with, and the point is that whatever you use, and I prefer that you do it more frequently just with a scrub brush and water than to use harsh chemicals. But if you do use any chemicals, it is essential that you rinse that bird bath so well that you think you've gone overboard on that. You just don't want any chemicals in there. And again, remember that the birds need the water year round. In some ways, when there's snow, you should make an extra effort to put out water for them because that's when they have a really hard time finding it. So, next thing, do you provide shelter and safety? Birds actually need a good deal of shelter, both from the weather and from predators. And that safety can be provided by dense shrubs or layers of plant materials that a larger animal cannot get into. This fringe tree in the center of the slide is the fringe tree in our front yard, and it's in bloom right now, the same way as it is in this picture. And it happens to be quite dense, in part because it got some antler rub when it was very young and became a multi-trunk tree. But it's got a lot of branches and feathers, and any bird that gets in there is not going to be easy to pounce on. And in fact, when we have hummingbirds come to our yard, it's really fun. We can see they always fly first into the fringe tree. And here one is in our fringe tree. They take a look around at what's in our yard. They go to where they want to nectar, and then they fly back into the fringe tree and look around again. They may repeat it several times. It's important that you have some density for not just hummingbirds, but all sorts of small birds that will value that safety. It's a chance for them to rest and let their guard down just a little bit. Different birds use different layers of plants. Some birds like to be up high, some like to be low. This photo in the upper right shows the Glencarlin Library demonstration garden where I co-lead. It's got a nice big maple tree up here, and then we've got layers of shrubs underneath. So wherever an animal wants to be, they can find the right level. Brush piles, you can see a brush pile on the right that's fairly easily created. In fact, it's quite helpful that if you have limbs that fall in your yard, you have a great place to throw them, and it becomes great habitat for birds and also other creatures. Rock piles can also be helpful, or overhangs from your house where birds can get out of the rain. If you provide a birdhouse, you really need to make sure that it is safely constructed and situated. You don't want to put a birdhouse that is, for instance, in a location where predators can easily access, and that's totally worth considering. Do leave snags. A snag is what we call a dead tree. And a lot of people think a dead tree is a bad thing. In nature, a dead tree is usually a pretty good thing. Approximately 85 species of birds in America need cavity nests, which are generally done in dead trees. Few cavity nesters will easily accept a man-made birdhouse instead. And unfortunately, most of the cavities that are around are being taken up by invasive birds, house sparrows and European starlings, because they are also cavity nesters. So pity the poor woodpecker that makes, hollows out a cavity one year to use, and it later gets taken over by other birds. Then the woodpecker has to keep on making new cavities. I have heard say, and I believe that it's true, that dead trees have more life in them than a living tree. And that is because all the insects and fungi and microorganisms that feed on that decaying wood create this huge biome. Frankly, that's really important. Now, a lot of people are worried about leaving a dead tree because they're afraid it's going to fall and damage their home. Take a look over here on the left at these two dead trees that the homeowners, who are big bird watchers, had lopped off high up, so that there's a lot of dead wood to benefit birds and other creatures, but even if they fall, they're not going to reach the house. That's a great idea if that can work for you. Do leave the leaves. Leaving leaves is super important. Insects overwinter in some stage of development, either as a larva, as hatched out uh, butterfly or other insect. But over winter, they almost all use leaf litter for cover, and we need the insects to feed everybody up the food chain. If we rake up the leaves, we are raking up the insects, how they would actually make it through the winter. I used to not even think about it, and just I knew that there weren't as many insects around in winter, but I didn't think about where are they. And the fact of the matter is they are still in nature. They use what nature provides, which is leaf litter. You can see this little robin in my front yard who is getting all the dried grass strands to build her nest. If I had cleaned up my yard before she got to it, what would she be using for her nesting material? Leaves provide great mulch for plants and provide nutrients, the exact nutrients basically that are needed for all the decomposers in the soil and create great healthy soil. Plant stems are also nesting places for a lot of insects. So it's a great idea that if you have native plants that are the size of a pencil or larger, you can leave those stems. You can cut them down to 8 to 24 inches, anywhere in that range. And that will actually help insects be able to get into the center of those stems and lay their eggs. You leave it for 1 year, they quickly get covered up by the new growth that surrounds them, and you don't start seeing those, keep seeing those stems anymore. And you get great nesting material for a lot of particularly native bees. I just have to say, it's become very popular to have bee houses that people buy. They are just imitation plant stems. What the bees really want is the plant stem to nest in. They only need the bee house or bee hotel if you remove all the stems, and it's much smarter to just leave the stems. Leaves provide nesting material, as we saw from the robin. Do wait until full spring to clean up, and I'll add this caveat, and then only when you absolutely need to. What does full spring mean? It's a tricky question and very debatable amongst people who care about this. But if you have 5 nights in a row that are 50 degrees or more, most everything that is going to hatch out of the overwintering state will have done so by then. And I would suggest only do the cleanup in the areas that really need the fancy cleanup. The more I am into supporting animals in my yard, the more I start seeing differently. And I see the leaves as being beautiful and part of nature. And I accept how it looks. And my eyes are different than they used to be. I appreciate it a lot more now. Another really important thing is don't kill the bird's protein. Eschew pesticides. Pesticides are really there mostly for people because we think we don't like insects, but the fact of the matter is that birds love insects. It provides them with protein. 96% of songbirds need to feed their babies protein. They cannot feed their babies seeds, no matter how much bird food you put out. Only a very few kinds of songbirds do that, mostly the finches. Insects are the reason that we have migration in the Western Hemisphere. The birds that overwinter in South America come to North America because of our flush of spring insects that provide enough protein, enough additional protein so that they can hatch out one or two more babies and have them be successfully raised with that amount of protein. Uh, and then in order to fuel that migration, migratory birds need the protein and fat to make the incredibly long distance flights that they make in both spring and fall. You need to remember that pesticides do not discriminate which insects they kill. I get very angry when I read in the popular press people giving advice and they don't know what they're talking about. They say, oh, be sure that if you get a pesticide, you get the kind that only kills the bad insects. Well, guess what? Nature doesn't actually judge the insects as good and bad. And I've become very uncomfortable with the idea of calling an insect good or bad. I think that any native insect that belongs here via evolution is a good insect. We might not like what it does to us. I certainly don't like ticks on me. I don't like to be bitten by mosquitoes. But the native ones have a place, and often their place is in the food chain, helping feed other animals. When the balance is in place, they do not expand their numbers so much that they become a problem. So I really prefer that nature finds its balance with what insects are eaten and survive as versus me trying to direct that. And I need to remind you, some people think, oh, well, if I use an organic pesticide, it's much better than a chemical pesticide. Well, let me tell you, all chemicals are based on some sort of organic state. It doesn't matter if your pesticide is made out of chrysanthemums. I've had someone stand in my doorway trying to sell me on getting my yard sprayed. Uh, Despite the fact that I was surrounded by all these native plants, I said, I grow these in order to have the insects. Oh, he said, we have pesticides made out of chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums won't hurt you. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter what it's made out of. A lot of pesticides are made out of chrysanthemums or something, a neonicotinoid, which is what's in tobacco. And by the way, one kernel of corn that has been grown with a neonicotinoid will kill a songbird that eats it. So pesticides don't just kill the pests, they kill the birds too. Pesticides also kill life in the soil, and that is a very dangerous thing because healthy soil is teeming with life, all sorts of microorganisms, and the pesticides can certainly do major damage to that. And there's new research coming out that says that fungicides can be just as bad. So when you need to control things, please use non-toxic controls as your first choice. And that could include using water to clean insects away, using your hand to brush them off, that sort of thing. I invite you to cultivate new standards, change your standards, cultivate a greater appreciation of the life around you. Want you to remember all your life you've been told that these are bugs, but they're not. They're bird food. I want to point out a couple of things here. First of all, if you don't recognize this bottom left photo, that is a ladybug larva. People think that these are a little bit scary looking. When I have seen them in the past, they look a bit like alligators to me. And I thought I was being very silly until I read some other people who called them, yeah, they look like little alligators. Well, those are ladybug larvae, and they eat more aphids than the adult ladybugs do. The picture up in the upper right, gardeners who grow tomatoes may recognize the tobacco hornworm or tomato hornworm, which unfortunately can eat huge amounts of a tomato plant in a very short time. But a lot of you may not recognize what looks like little rice kernels on its back. And those are actually the cocoons of a parasitic wasp, a tiny little wasp that lays her eggs on that caterpillar. And I like to call that caterpillar a dead worm crawling, because those little parasitic wasps are eating the caterpillar from the inside. They are controlling that kind of hornworm naturally. And so I had someone suggest to me an idea I'm going to pass along to you, which is if you find such a worm on your tomato plant, consider moving it to another tomato plant. Usually those of us who grow tomatoes find that we have a volunteer tomato plant that comes up in the second year that after you've grown tomatoes. Designate that as your sacrificial tomato plant and move the caterpillar over there. Let it eat that tomato plant that you did not plant and become the host animal for the parasitic wasp. And that helps establish a natural balance. Lastly, I want to point out the redbud leaves over here on the left that have these holes in them. When I first saw that, I thought, oh my goodness, that's some terrible insect damage, until I learned that those holes are created by a mama leafcutter bee. And she eats these little circles out, and she uses a few of them to form a little tiny, it looks like a green cigar, and she puts some nectar and pollen in there and creates bee food. And then she lays the egg of one of her little babies in there and seals it off. And she needs to do this over and over in order to lay her brood for the next year. And now that I understand that, anytime I see a plant, and it's often red buds, that have these holes in them, I see it completely differently. I see it as if the bee has decorated the plant for me with polka dots. I invite you to change that sort of mindset. Dr. Douglas Tallamy, who has done so much research on insects and their importance in the environment, suggests that if you can step 10 steps back and look at a plant that has insect damage and it doesn't seem very noticeable, you should just accept it. That's an acceptable level of insect damage. Moving on, do remove invasive plants, even the pretty ones. And sadly, I am going to tell you the secret. Most invasive plants are fairly pretty. They became invasive because they had great qualities and got widely planted before they became invasive. Now, let's be clear on what we mean by invasive. I do not just mean some plant that gets a little bit out of control and takes over where you don't want it to. Instead, an invasive plant has a very strict definition laid out by two different executive orders that were signed by Presidents Clinton and Presidents Obama. And it's basically, first of all, it has to be a non-native plant that's capable of escaping cultivation and outcompeting native plants in the wild, causing harm. The harm can be to the economy, to the environment or to human, animal, or plant health. They get formally designated by local authorities who see what is going on in the wild. Invasiveness is not about how the plant behaves in your garden, it's about how it behaves in the wild. They have great competitive strategies. Many invasives leaf out early or stay green longer than natives, which gives them a real advantage. Most of the time, invasives do not provide great nutrition to local animals. If you are not sure if something is invasive, Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia have lots of great information about invasive plants. We've got videos, we've got articles, we've got fact sheets about individual invasive plants. Go to the mgmv.org website and you'll get loads of information about them. One important thing, you'll probably need to do a little research about how to remove the invasive plants. It really varies a lot depending on what the invasive plant is. Some of them are relatively easy to remove, and some of them are really hard to remove. But it is a good fight, and I invite you to fight that fight. Now, one invasive plant that a number of you have probably heard of, if you're interested in birds, the word has gone out that Nandina domestica, commonly known as heavenly bamboo, is bad for birds. This does not mean that any bird that eats a single berry is going to die. That is not how it is bad for birds. What has happened is that there was a study, a necropsy done of a number of cedar waxwings. And I did see that one of our listeners today was particularly interested in cedar waxwings. Cedar waxwings are known to do some feasting. They come and they just absolutely gorge on something that there's a lot of. And unfortunately, there was a necropsy done of a group of dead cedar waxwings. They opened them up and they found that what they had gorged on was the nandina. And so we know that birds that eat enough nandina are harmed by it. We have no idea what small amounts of nandina consumption can do over the long term to individual birds. But if you do have nandina, first of all, I'd suggest you look at replacements. We have some excellent native replacements. Elaine Mills and I have done a video that is exactly on replacing nandina. But even if you can't replace your nandina immediately, you may want to cut the berries off so that they don't tempt the birds to eat them over winter when other food is scarce. Last tip of what to do for birds is do offer them the healthy food that they need, which is native plants. As the basis for the local food chain, native plants are key for maintaining biodiversity. They are what supports all the different insects and then up the food chain, starting with the insects. And of course, other animals eat the native plants too, including the birds. Native plants have co-evolved with the environment and including the microbes and insects and so forth, forming this mutually dependent relationships. The food web is what we call it. And it's really only healthy when there are all sorts of different relationships going on throughout that food web. You can't start snipping away at that and removing it. So having a good variety of native plants is really important. We're really lucky in Northern Virginia because we have a wonderful range of choices. We have plants from the north. We're at the bottom end of northern range of plants. We're at the northern edge of the southern range of plants. We can really grow a lot of different native plants here. They are adapted to our growing conditions, including the amount of weather and water. And frankly, as our climate changes, they're the ones that are most likely to be able to continue to adapt. They are adapted to feed those local insects, but not be killed by them. We know that because it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. We're also incredibly lucky here in Northern Virginia that we have great information about native plants. This book, Native Plants for Northern Virginia by Plant Nova Natives, is such a fabulous book. It is available for free at plantnovanatives.org, or you can buy it in many, many places for, I don't know, it usually sells between $5 and $7, and it is full of beautiful pictures and information about our native plants. Now, the goal is, and a lot of people wonder, how many native plants do I need to have? And it's really a percentage of biomass, not even the number of plants, but biomass. And you want 70% native biomass in order to effectively support local wildlife. This is based on a really interesting study done locally in the Washington, D.C. area. Dr. Desiree Narango, I got to hear her speak about her study, and it was studying chickadees and their nesting habits and where they nested. And it turns out that they are able to raise nests of babies successfully when they are in an area that has at least 70% native biomass. Native biomass, mind you, includes native trees, which have a lot more biomass than a single little herbaceous plant. So trees are a very important part of that. And if you haven't been planting native trees in your yard, this is the call to do so. One more thing before we take our break, and that is the question of cultivars. You may have heard that native plants are good, but you may have heard conflicting information about whether a cultivar, which is a plant that is based on a straight species, what happens in nature, a cultivar is an evolutionary step away from what just took place in nature all on its own. Sometimes they happen naturally, sometimes they're developed by cultivators who breed different things. Usually when men or women create a cultivar, they're trying to please not the insects, but the humans, our eyes, to make the plant look nice. And so here's the deal. Cultivars can risk being less attractive or nutritious to insects and birds. First of all, when they have double flowers, if you look over here at these pictures, you can see this white echinacea has this pom-pom in the center that's very different than the pink straight species echinacea. These are all little individual flowers, actually, that have nectaries. And it's very easy for a butterfly, for instance, that wants to get nectar. It can just walk around slowly on here and access all kinds of nectar. This flower, the anatomy is quite different. And not only can the butterfly not get past these small petals that are making up this fluffiness, but the internal structure does not have as much of the nectaries in there. And so this flower offers almost nothing to a butterfly, whereas the straight species offers a lot. Another challenge is with plants that have a color change. When you change the color of a plant from what nature gave it to some other color that looks appealing to us, the color is changed because of a chemical. And that chemical in the leaf that changes the color may not taste good to the insect. You may be familiar with this when you eat, for instance, a red lettuce versus a green lettuce. The red lettuce has chemicals that generally make it more bitter. Our human palates can handle that very nicely. We like a variety of flavors. The insects don't so much. So look out for those in your native plants that are cultivars. What seems to not be a problem to the insects or animals is when the plant has been bred to be a different size. Sometimes we want a smaller or a larger plant, and that So far, we've not found research to say is a problem. Okay, I've got, I'm sorry, I said that last one was the last thing, but I've got one more slide I need to give, and that is no death traps for the birds that come into your yard. Death traps include domestic cats that are free ranging. They unfortunately kill 2.4 billion birds a year, according to the American Bird Conservancy that did a great big study. Mind you, I love cats. These are my cats that you're seeing. And my cats love birds, but they stay inside. And that's the way that cats are not going to be a problem to the environment. Another problem for birds that we create are window strikes. Birds often see the reflection of our gardens in our windows, and particularly when they are startled, but sometimes when they're just busy, trying to fly. They don't realize that our windows that are mirroring our gardens are actually a hard, flat surface, and they hit our windows. And for any of us that have had a bird hit our window, it's terrible. You rush outside and you look to see, did the bird make it? Did the bird not make it? And when it doesn't, it's just a terrible thing. Fortunately, there are some really great products now, including what you can see in this upper window. This is actually my own window just here to my right. With this clear tape that I put in strips, and it's a commercial product, super available, super easy to put on. And those stripes break up the window just enough that the birds see it. And yet I, looking out, really don't see it. Those stripes just disappear to me. Again, we've already talked about pesticides. Really, really urge you not to be using pesticides. I've already talked about if you have bird feeders, you need to keep them clean, especially hummingbird feeders. Some people, I don't get it. They don't have their thinking caps on. They want to put something other than sugar in with the water. The only thing that hummingbirds should be drinking is a mix of sugar and water if you're going to feed them. And you need to change out that nectar really frequently, especially the hotter it gets. You may need to change it every day. And hummingbird feeders need to be cleaned at least weekly with soap and water and rinsed extremely well. I would say it's even better to feed hummingbirds with great plants, native plants that they are going to love all year round and won't have any danger to them. And here we are for our first question break.
Yes, we have two questions so far, Alyssa. The first, is diatomaceous earth safe to use on insects if birds might eat the insects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The diatomaceous earth works because it basically cuts up the insect. It literally is death by cutting them up. That is an issue for a lot of insects. It's not going to hurt the bird that eats the insect after it's been cut up by the diatomaceous earth, but actually just recently heard a speaker recommend, and I haven't done my own research on this, but this makes a lot of sense to me. Diatomaceous earth is really best used for slugs and snails. They obviously have those incredibly soft bodies that are going to be damaged by those cuts. But you probably don't want all the good insects getting cut in that same way. So you should put out the diatomaceous earth in the evening and then wash it off in the morning so that other insects don't get cut up by it.
Thank you for those last tips. They answered a third question that had come in about how to handle slugs on the sidewalk at night.
Ah, okay.
Another participant has some comments and related question. A neighbor sprays herbicide all along the backyard fence line, a known one that causes health problems in people too. This person assumes that this will negatively impact the health of birds. Do you think it's best to not attract birds to that area of her yard? she knows that the soil is probably also affected.
I'm so sorry to hear that. And that becomes a whole human problem. And those are so awkward. I certainly have the desire to get along really well with my neighbors. I doubt that the insecticides are going to pose a huge danger to the birds themselves, other than when they're being sprayed, because probably there's not a lot of birds there at that moment. It certainly will, at the very least, kill the insects and potentially any insects that, while they are dying, the bird eats could be a problem. And that way the bird would ingest the insecticide that is on the insect. So, yeah, I would say that that's not the best place to be super attracting of birds. But, you could put in some good cover there. And I don't know that you'd need to scare the birds away from there, but I certainly wouldn't attract them there deliberately. I'm sorry, I haven't dealt with that question before, and I'd be interested in doing some research. If I learn anything more, I'll post something in the comments as this goes online.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alyssa. That's all the questions for right now. We can move on to your next section.
Let's get going. I am going to suggest 7 great sustenance plants for you to consider in your yard. And that means, when I say sustenance, it means that they provide berries or seed or nectar for plants to actually consume. The first is sweet bay magnolia. This is obviously a member of the magnolia family, but it's a fairly small one. And it's a very lovely small tree. It only grows to 12 to 30 feet. It's semi-evergreen, which is great to have some greenness through the winter. It has these really pretty creamy flowers that have a lovely lemony scent. The berries attract a number of different birds that will enjoy them. Plus, it is a larval host plant for several butterflies and moths. It also has, there's quite a bit of information about it available on a tried and true fact sheet on the MGMV website. In fact, most of the plants that I am going to be recommending have a tried and true fact sheet on the website. So I'm not going to say that through all the rest of these slides. You can just see if they're available. If you haven't taken a look at the tried and true fact sheets, they're really great. They're easy to print off. So if you value having a hard copy, you can have that and take it with you. But they're full of great information about just one single plant. Now, I am such a plant person that I can't help myself from recommending an alternative for each of these sustenance plants. I won't talk about the alternative very much, but I'll just throw it out for you. If you want a different plant that provides some of the same things as the sweet bay magnolia, the downy serviceberry, Amelanchier arborea, is a wonderful plant. You can see here is a Mrs. Cardinal in this picture enjoying the berries. Another great plant is winterberry, Ilex verticillata. And it is so great. It provides great winter interest. The shrubs can grow up to 12 feet tall. And you can hear, I've got this video going. If you think you're hearing a bird, it's this little mockingbird. And I have to tell you this story. The two pictures in the center are actually the same winterberry plant. And this little mocker and his lady friend every year at Glen Carlin Library Garden take this winterberry as their territory. Anytime you drive up and park, and this is right by our parking lot, park right by this winterberry plant, you'll probably see 1 or 2 mockingbirds there. In the early spring, he got up here and got onto the handicap parking sign and was doing his sound marking, saying, "This is my territory," by singing out his imitation of other birds. And I thought this was great. And so I decided to video it. And I got this little clip of him, exactly as you see. And then, of course, when I finished, I thought, well, I better check and make sure I really got that. And so I hit playback and started playing it back, and out came his song again. And do you know he dive bombed me? He thought I was another bird trying to challenge him by trying to sound mark the same territory. Anyway, I can't guarantee that if you have a winterberry, you will get mockingbirds like this, but it is a good possibility. I do want to let you know that although these can be large shrubs when they're straight species, there are smaller cultivars available. I actually have a couple of small ones in my own yard, and I think the names are so cute and funny. The female is called Billy Poppins, and the male is called Mr. Poppins. And as you can gather, since I just talked about male and female, these are dioecious plants with both a male and a female plant. And you need at least one male, and he can fertilize a number of female plants that are within 40 feet of each other. You may want to put the male back where he's not going to be as noticed because he's not going to have the beautiful berries through winter. It's the females that do that. They do attract a number of different kinds of birds. Do want to point out there's a cultivar that has kind of a yellow gold color. And it seems that birds don't always recognize that color of the winterberry as food. So it is a beautiful, beautiful plant, but maybe not as supportive. This is a plant that really likes wet feet in particular. So if you have a part of your yard that is a little bit damp, this is a great shrub to put in it. The alternative native shrub that also has beautiful winter interest is a red twig dogwood, Cornus sericea. It's not native right here in Arlington, but it is native nearby, and it's a very lovely shrub. Moving on to spice bush, one of my favorite shrubs. I have a number in my backyard. This is you can call it a shrub or a small tree depending on how big it grows, because it can grow from 6.5 to 16 feet. It is used to being in the understory. It takes from sun to shade, so a wide variety of conditions. This is also a dioecious plant with both male and female versions of it. You need to have both for them to set the drupes. Again, it can be one male and a number of females. I will tell you that I have never seen a retailer who sells them pre-sexed, which is a problem. The winter berries, you know what sex they are when you buy them. The spice bush, I've never seen them pre-sexed. And so the thing that you kind of have to do is plant a clump of them and hope that you get at least one of each. That's what I did in my own yard, and I was lucky. I've now been able to tell by the flowers, which have slight differences to them. If you look up close, they're distinctly different between male and female. Or you can do something else that I did, which is I convinced a neighbor to also plant some. So if you have them in a close proximity, that will work. The reason that those drupes are so great is that they have apparently the highest fatty lipid content in our area of any native shrub. And that's really great for the birds as they're trying to bulk up for their migration. It has both the beautiful lacy yellow blooms, and then later in the fall, it also is yellow again because the foliage turns a really beautiful color. For those of us in my neighborhood and maybe yours, it's a really great thing that it is also deer resistant. I have deer in my yard all the time. There's almost no plant that deer will not ever touch if they're really hungry, but this will be one of the last ones that they go for. Spice bush, as the name implies, has a lovely scent, and Native Americans apparently used it a fair amount. You can use the leaves in teas, and the drupes are apparently edible. I've not eaten any of my drupes. It is a host plant for the spice bush swallowtail. Take a look at the caterpillar over here. I think that's one of the coolest caterpillars around. It attracts a whole bunch of different birds, and it's a wonderful shrub. As an alternative to that, Black chokeberry is a terrific shrub. I have a black chokeberry in my yard, and it just got big enough this year to give us some blooms. We'll see if those blooms make it into the berries. The choke part of the name is a little off-putting. It doesn't mean that you or animals will actually choke on it. They're simply very astringent, and so people who try eating them, unless they cook it down and make jam and add a lot of sugar, will find that it's not a pleasant taste, but they are actually edible, not only to animals, but to us. Trumpet honeysuckle. So this is my trumpet honeysuckle on the front of my house on a custom built trellis that actually tips off the house so that when you need to repaint or do some work behind there, you have full access to it. Something to think about with any vine that you're dealing with. Trumpet honeysuckle Linacea sempervirens is a very robust and semi-evergreen plant. It can grow up to 20 feet high. It has beautiful red flowers with a yellow center that are almost a guarantee to attract hummingbirds. This window in the picture that you see with the open thing there, that's exactly where I sit in the morning to get dressed and do my hair. And I enjoy so much seeing the hummingbirds come right up, and they're just a few feet away from me, and I get to see them. There is a naturally occurring cultivar called John Clayton that was found in Gloucester, Virginia. I think I saw one of our attendees is from Gloucester. Um, and it was found there. It apparently created itself. It's all yellow flowers, and it has a smaller height and spread. It only grows to be about 12 feet tall, which can be very useful if you want a vine, but something a little bit smaller. They do like sun and moist soil. If you can provide them with that, you can use them either on a trellis or as ground cover. They, of course, not only do they feed hummingbirds, but they host moths and bring in the hummingbirds. Now, if you want an even more robust vine, you might want to consider Bignonia capreolata or crossvine, which can grow to be 40 feet tall. It also is a big hummingbird attractor. Okay, let's look at some native sunflowers, the Helianthus family. And this is a relatively large family. They are, as a group, considered a keystone species, which I'll be talking about in just a few minutes. And they have all sorts of insects that they support. You can see this one, Helianthus tuberosus, in the video that I grow. This is a Jerusalem artichoke. Every flower seems to have a bee on it, very happy bees. These are really easy to grow plants, and the woodland sunflower Helianthus divaricatus grows very happily in part shade and dry conditions, which can be really tough to find good plants for. The species in general are quite big spreaders. So depending on what your yard is like and what you're trying to accomplish, you may want to do what I've done with my Jerusalem artichokes, which is to use some really large tubs and sink them into the ground. And that way they're not going to spread outside of these really big pots. But I really value these plants mostly because of, again, what I see right outside of my window. I'm sorry, this isn't a great shot. It's a wintertime shot through a screen window, but those are goldfinches. And through winter, the goldfinches come and just have a great party on the seed heads of my Jerusalem artichoke. This is definitely a plant that you want to leave up through winter because of those seed heads. An alternative that gives you much that same happy look, but is much smaller plant is any of the Susans, black-eyed Susans or brown-eyed Susans, the Rudbeckia species. trying to give you a variety of kinds of plants that will support birds. Little blue stem, Schizocarium scoparium, is a grass that is really nice and quite supportive of the birds. I find the name a little confusing because they're a pretty tall grass. It's just that there's a big blue stem that is even bigger, but they can grow to be about 4 feet tall. And they have lovely soft colors in them. The blades have some blue and purple tones, and the seed heads are kind of bronzy. You can see even after fall and winter set in, they make beautiful colors, and those seed heads are so pretty, and a little light on them make them just sparkle. If you've got a slopey area and are worried about erosion, our native grasses and little blue stem in particular is terrific because they've got these amazing roots that go down as much as 5 feet, and they're really going to hold any soil in place that you've got. A lot of birds like the seeds, which are available through the winter. It hosts a lot of different kinds of skippers, which is a different division of Lepidoptera. There's butterflies, moths, and skippers. This plant is also great cover for wildlife. Do watch out if you give it too much shade or fertility or moisture. They are a little bit known for flopping over. They don't want to stay upright if they have too much fertility. Isn't that interesting? I tell you, native plants are easy to care for. You don't have to baby them at all. An alternative grass, native grass, that if the little blue stem doesn't work for you, you might want to look at bottle brush grass. And you can see why it's called bottle brush. It makes these spectacular seed heads that are just delightful. Then we have always, I like to include a plant, a native plant that people don't always like. And a lot of people love to hate pokeweed, but I think it's one of our most beautiful native plants. People do not like it because when it spreads, it really can take over, and it has a very deep taproot that if you let the plant grow to be very sizable, can be very difficult to remove. I know several people who have conscientiously let one or two or three pokeweeds remain in specific places, and they simply each spring make a point of weeding out any babies that come up around that pokeweed. And the plants are really beautiful. They're quite versatile. They take full sun to part shade. They can get really tall, 4 to 10 feet tall. What makes them so beautiful is the red stems or stalks and then the dark purple berries. I would not advise that you put that right by a patio because the berries can stain if they hit concrete. But out in the garden where they're just going to hit the soil, it's not going to be a problem. It really attracts a lot of birds, even in winter after the berries have kind of dried up. And I find it really fascinating that apparently cardinals use this berry in part to how, I mean, I don't know that they conscientiously do this, but these berries help their feathers be really red. You can see this picture of a painted bunting. In recent years, in Northern Virginia, we've had several times a painted bunting, which is not normally here in our area, that has come up and done some overwintering. And you can see this painted bunting is actually eating some dried up pokeweed berries. They know where there's some good nutrition. Now, every time I mention pokeweed, I do feel that I need to mention that it is poisonous to humans. So, be careful that you're not trying to nosh on it. Except that every time I say this, somebody who grew up in the South will talk about poke salat, or I'm not sure how they say it, poke salat, which is apparently a Southern delicacy that is made out of the young leaves that are boiled many times in order to remove the poisonous quality. I have never been anywhere that I've been offered that salad, so I have not tasted it. But I want you to know that it's generally poisonous. You shouldn't be eating it unless some Southerner who knows how to prepare it properly uh, serves this to you, in which case I think you'd be safe to eat it. As an alternative, another native plant that people love to hate, and that is Virginia creeper. Virginia creeper is very robust, which is why most people don't like it. Once it gets established, you'll have Virginia creeper for a long time, but it is a very beautiful plant. The berries are very nutritious too. Birds, and the red color of the leaves in fall is really quite stunning. I have seen places where it's been allowed to spread as a ground cover, and it is beautiful. So that brings us through our sustenance plants. Are there any questions?
There's just one question. One of our participants was very impressed with the way you grow trumpet honeysuckle on the facade of your home. She would like to grow the same vine on the front of her brick house, but asks, would that vine cause damage to the bricks?
I don't believe it would. It doesn't cling to bricks or anything else. What it does is, as you saw in that photo, there were three uprights and it wraps around the upright. That is how it grows upwards, by twisting around something. So if you could provide something off the wall for it to twist around. And in fact, my home is brick, it's painted brick, but it does not attach itself to the brick. It twists around the trellis. I hope that helps.
Very good. Those are all the questions, so we can move on to learn about the keystone plants you're recommending.
Okay, great. I will do so. So let's talk about keystone plants. They're named Keystone because they play the same support role that keystones in ancient Roman arches play. And that is that the arch is dependent on that center stone. If you remove that center stone, the whole arch collapses. But when it's there and appropriately placed, it makes the arch work. And that's what keystone plants do for the environment. Not all native plants support wildlife equally. All native plants are good, but some are super plants. And 75% of the insect food required by birds and other animals is produced by just a few plant genera. So it's really important that you have some of those plants in your yard. And I've got a quote here from Douglas Tallamy, who is the entomologist who has done so much of the research that we are depending on now to understand how our environment works. He says a yard without keystone plants will fall far short of the insect abundance necessary to sustain viable food webs, even if dozens of native plant genera are present. I would say other native plant genera are present. So it's really important that we start with the keystones and make sure that we have several keystone plants in any garden that we plan. So we're going to start here with the white oaks, which are currently the very most supportive of the keystone plants. Used to be that in America, the number one keystone plant was the American chestnut tree, which unfortunately was wiped out by an invasive Asian chestnut blight. I have been fascinated with the stories of trying to restore the American chestnut, and I think we're really just about on the cusp of doing so and hoping that that will happen soon. And I'm hoping that our forests will once again be filled with chestnuts. Apparently, the forests of the pioneers, for instance, were completely different than the ones that we know today because of the presence of American chestnuts. But without the chestnuts, the white oaks are the top of the Keystone. Oak trees in general are divided into two different families, red oaks and white oaks. Both of them are really good and highly supportive. The white oaks are a little more supportive than the red oaks. Just so that if in case you're interested, if you want to know if the oak, even if you can't totally identify the oak tree that you're looking at, the way to tell the difference between white and red oaks are that white oaks always have the tips are smooth. They do not have any points, whereas red oaks have points, little bristle tips. And that is how you divide red and white oaks in general. Um, Many birds love and use oak trees. The white oak family supports more than 530 kinds of Lepidoptera in America, throughout America. In Virginia, I wanted to research specifically which kind of white oaks are in Virginia, and I've got a list here for you. I'm so thrilled that I have a post oak that overhangs my yard, so I know that I've got a keystone, the top of the keystone plant that is helping to nourish my yard. Interesting little factoid. Blue jays plant more acorns than squirrels do. I think we probably all would have thought that it's mostly the squirrels that are, you know, burying their acorns and then forgetting them that plant the trees. In fact, blue jays do more and at a much wider distance because they'll plant them up to 5 miles away from where they came. So it's a great spreader of genetic diversity. If you have a small yard and think that you cannot fit an oak tree in your yard, you should know that there are cultivars of oaks that are a little bit smaller. And so you can do a little bit of research on that. The second keystone plant to look at is the black cherry tree, Prunus serratina. Black cherries are fairly common in our Northern Virginia area. They're very majestic trees. They have these showy white blooms that are fragrant in April and May. Right now is when to be looking at them. The reason that a lot of us don't notice that is that they can be very tall trees and those blooms may be up high. But they are larval host plants for 390 different kinds of Lepidoptera. In other words, 390 species of butterflies, moths, and skippers lay their eggs on this tree. And when the eggs hatch out, they can eat the leaves of this tree. A lot of people don't like the black cherry because one of the insects, one of the Lepidoptera, is the eastern tent caterpillar. And those pictures are over here in the upper right. They don't like the way that it looks, this odd sort of sack of eggs and later caterpillars that are laid in the top of these trees. But I want to point out that there are more than 60 kinds of birds that eat the eastern tent caterpillars, and some birds use the silk for their nesting materials. So this is a case where this is a tree that's really good for the birds, and it's purely an aesthetic reason that most people think that they don't care for it. So I invite you to try to change your mind and embrace the idea that the tent caterpillars are a great bird supporter. Birch tree, Betula species, and there are a number of different birch species, 5 of which are native in Virginia, ranging in height from 30 to 75 feet. The birch family together support 350 different kinds of Lepidoptera. They generally like sun to part shade and medium to moist soils. If you haven't had a chance to drink some birch beer, look for it. There is actually a carbonated drink made out of fermented birch sap, and I have tried it, and I think it's quite good. It's a little bit like root beer, but it has its own flavor profile that I quite like. River birch is really pretty plant that is noted for the peeling bark, and it again really loves wet areas. If you've got a slightly soggy corner, river birch would do well there. Um, it has hanging catkins that the birds really like. Eastern white pine. Pine, of course, is a wonderful evergreen. Uh, the white pine always has three needles coming out of each bundle. That's how you can help to recognize the white pine. They grow to be 50 to 80 feet tall. They support 179 species of Lepidoptera, and the pine nuts get eaten by a whole bunch of different birds. The eastern bluebirds use needles to help build their nests, and hummingbirds use the sap to seal up their nests. Evergreens, we've talked about birds wanting shelter, and certainly in winter, evergreens are really important as providers of good shelter. And I know that in our forest, when I've gone out with my husband looking for owls, we always look for a big blob up towards the top of any sort of evergreen tree. And that is sometimes an owl, which is really special. Blueberries, Vaccinium species. Uh, the Vaccinium family, this is, of course, a shrub, and they support 270 different kind of Lepidoptera. I put this picture of a carton of blueberries here because often in this talk, people will say, do you mean the kind of blueberries that we eat? Yes, I mean exactly those kind of blueberries that we eat. Cranberries and deerberries are also in the same family, so they're part of this group as well as the blueberries. They are yummy to all sorts of birds, so yummy that if you are trying to eat those berries yourself, you'll probably have to net them. You may want to plant several blueberry plants, net one or two for yourself, and leave one or two for the birds to get at. But it is so fun to pick and eat blueberries off a plant as you walk through a garden, which I have had the privilege of doing a number of times. Blueberries are self-fertile, but several different Lepidoptera set. You should have it come in two different varieties that bloom at the same time and can cross-pollinate. Either quite That's what gives you some really good bloom. They are known for really liking acid soil, and this is my opportunity as a master gardener, as we always like to do, to suggest that if you have not done a soil test recently, you should do so. Knowing the acidity of your soil as well as the composition of other elements of your soil, other nutrients and so forth, is a really good idea. The Virginia Cooperative Extension has a very easy to do and frankly inexpensive soil test. You gather soil from several parts of the area that you want tested, mix it together, mail it to Virginia Cooperative Extension headquarters down at Virginia Tech. And for just a very inexpensive amount, you get back within a few days a soil test report, and it is really valuable. If you find that your soil is not acidic enough for the blueberries, they will give you a suggestion as to how to acidify it, how much you need to use of a soil acidifier and so forth. So it's really great information. Last thing I want to say is that blueberries are stunningly beautiful plants in autumn. They have this really pretty red colored leaves, scarlet leaves that will make a garden look absolutely beautiful. Asters. Asters are a whole group of flowers that bloom generally in the late fall. And together, the aster family supports 112 species of Lepidoptera and host a whole variety of butterflies. In other words, they provide nectar to 112 species, and a whole bunch of the Lepidoptera can lay their eggs on this plant. Um, Supports a whole bunch of different birds that really like the seed. Depending on the variety, you can get ones that like sun, ones that like shade, ones that like moist soil, ones that like dry soil. So big variety. Some of them can be really robust and grow up to 6 feet tall. This is one of the kinds of plants that you can do a spring cut back. You can cut this plant back as it's growing up to early July. July 4 is the easy date to remember. You can cut it a third, even more than once if you want, and that will make the plant a good deal more compact if you don't want it to be so tall. Part of what's great about it is the abundance of late season bloom, which is really important, particularly to our native bees, because they need to really bulk up and provision their homes with a lot of the late season pollen and nectar. And the last one is goldenrod, which is kind of a companion, I think, to the asters. In fact, this video here of my front yard, you'll see some of both in the video. Goldenrod also blooms at the end of the season. There's at least 10 different kinds native here in the Chesapeake Bay area. You can cut them back, just like I was saying, the asters, to make them more compact and maybe a little less floppy. But they together support 115 different kinds of Lepidoptera. One important thing is to not confuse it with ragweed, which causes hay fever. A lot of people are afraid of goldenrod because they think it's ragweed and that it's going to cause hay fever. But in fact, it does not cause hay fever. It is pollinated by pollinators, bees primarily, and that means that it's not putting out the pollen into the air, which is what causes hay fever. Again, it makes a great late season show, and really nicely, deer very rarely damage it. Now, just a few more items before we wrap this up. I've hit on a number of keystone plants, but there's a number more. And if you would like to find out which keystone plants are going to be perfect for your yard, you can go to the National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Finder at this web address. Take a picture of this if you want to save that address, and you can put in your zip code and find out the top keystone plants for your specific zip code. It's a really amazing service. This is something that's only available recently. A few years ago, you would have really had to struggle to figure out what are the best keystone plants for your yard, but now it's an easy thing to do. Few more helpful resources if any of this is of interest to you. There's the Master Gardener's Tried and True Selections sheets that I've already mentioned. The Northern Virginia Bird Alliance Sanctuary Program, I am an ambassador for that, have been for a number of years. It used to be called Audubon at Home, and in fact, you saw my own home sign with that name. I haven't been able to trade that out for a new sign yet. They recently changed their name, but that's a wonderful program where an ambassador will come to your yard, talk about a lot of these same principles that we've gone over, and take a look at your yard and offer suggestions, help you identify some of the plants that you have, either good or bad, and help you make a plan of how to make your yard more wildlife friendly. We just talked about Native Plant Finder, and then there's another one that's very similar that National Audubon Society maintains. The Home Garden National Park website is also full of great suggestions, and it is a way that you can join with other people to show that you are trying to make a difference across the country. And then there's the Plant Nova Natives website, which for those of us here in Northern Virginia, we are so fortunate. This website is absolutely fabulous and has so much great information. And I urge you to take a look. And a few references, if things that I said intrigued you and you want to dig more into it, you can take a look at these books. And I also want to say thank you to all the people who allowed me to use their photos for this presentation, but especially Elaine Mills, who is our host today and who is the most awesome plant photographer. And we're to the end, and I'm happy to take questions.
It turns out we have no further questions, Alyssa. We would like to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and especially your personal experience, all those lovely photos and videos from your own garden. I know folks are going to feel a lot more confident with the tips you've shared today in being able to feel more welcoming to birds in their own home gardens. We know this is the last talk that you'll be giving for us as a Master Gardener in Northern Virginia, but we sincerely hope that you will return as a guest speaker after your move to California this summer.